There is art and there is illustration. Like it or not, these are two very different things. Illustration is something that leaves little to nothing up to the viewer's own imagination. Everything is played out like a story being told to them by a separate party. It can present many themes, it can be dramatic or dull, and it can be very enjoyable, but it is an illustration. Art, on the other hand, true art, is something that makes the viewer think and forces them to interpret whatever they see in their own special way. An illustration is something that could easily be described through words, but true art surpasses the need for arbitrary noise and communicates with the viewer in an entirely different manner. An illustration can be accompanied by a story that describes it, while art by itself is a different kind of story altogether. Some might think that this somehow means illustrations, such as comic books, cartoons, posters, movies, and the like, are somehow inferior to what others would identify as real art, and there are, without a doubt, pretentious fops who would eagerly dismiss anything of the like as just that. However, while I can understand and appreciate these views to some extent, they do not reflect my own. Art does not need to be something that fits a specific person's taste, or even something that everybody likes, as long as it prompts the viewer to think or feel something that they wouldn't have if they had not laid eyes on it. As far as style goes, it doesn't matter how something is drawn, painted, or what it looks like. It does not matter what the artist's methods or tropes are, how much detail there is, what colors are used, or even what it looks like, as long as it triggers something unique and unexpected within the psyche of the viewer is able to appreciate it, to establish an indescribable connection between the psyche of the artist and that of the viewer in a way that transcends all else. One could use countless details to make a piece so elaborate that the viewer may not know what to make of it, or convey so much emotion with very few lines placed in unusual ways. There is not a special technique that can be applied to everything, and not everything is meant to be defined by a certain something, in a certain way, to be recognized by everyone. There is art that some people will relate to based on their tastes, that others will find no interest in. There are very, very few pieces that are universally appealing, such as the Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa has kept people intrigued for centuries. At first glance, one might think this piece is rather dull, but it is easily one of the most mysterious pieces in history. Her expression is so vague, and there's no obvious implication of what exactly she is thinking, so it's up to the viewer to come up with their own interpretation of who she is. The reason this piece is so meaningful is because it could mean anything. It is not confined to any certain emotion or design. However, not everyone needs to devote 15 years to a single piece in order for it to be beautiful or fascinating, and it really isn't fair to expect anyone to follow the example of someone else and do things a certain way to appeal to certain people based on mimicking a certain someone, even such remarkable, admirable artists as Leonardo da Vinci. Art is timeless regardless of what form it takes, though there is very little these days that could be called art and not an illustration. I myself mostly draw illustrations made simply to go along with the stories I tell, and make very few pieces that could be glorified on their own, and be compared with anything else. Someone can adore an illustration for what it is and how it is presented, but unless it sparks something in them that was not simply intended by the illustrator, it cannot be identified as true art. Surprisingly, many of my illustrations have made my viewers think and feel things beyond what I ever intended, but I don't want to exalt myself by comparing myself to any great artist that came before, considering I might not really be an artist to begin with. But I've spewed enough of this pretentious shit. Let's move on to something else. For a long time, the only art that was accepted by the masses in general was realism. One's skill and artistic talent was measured and determined by their ability to mimic and capture the real world down to every possible detail. The more photorealistic a piece was, the better it was. Anything that wasn't portrayed realistically was frowned upon, because many thought that somehow made it less than something that looked like the real world. Artists kept themselves paid for by making commissions. However, there weren't a lot of people who were open-minded enough to be willing to accept or buy such art. Eventually, through the efforts of many starving artists came Impressionism, Expressionism, and abstract art. The basic idea behind all of these was to look at the world in a different way, based purely on how it made the artist feel, though taken to different degrees depending on the methods used. The art often reflected just that, the artist's mind. Violent storms could mean sadness or anger, for example. This allowed people to look at the world differently, and not in such a strictly materialistic way. Over the years, decades, centuries, this has led to other things, from the beloved illustrations of Norman Rockwell and his depiction of American life, to Peanuts and Looney Tunes. This has led from one basic style to countless other unique, distinct styles. Some have been groundbreaking, others not so much. Even a blotch of random colors and shapes slapped together, whether seen as an illustration or true art, was made possible. Now let's talk about something else. There's this funny little thing called art therapy. The idea behind this is simply that an artist, illustrator, whatever, is constantly dreaming of new things. Stuff just keeps poofing into their heads without stopping, and they need to let it out, whether by drawing or writing or painting or sculpting. Doing this makes room for new things to appear, and by not unleashing what's in their head, they allow it to be cluttered as this shit just keeps generating and piling up, and that can make everyday life feel dull and stressful. This isn't how it is for everybody, but there are many who accept art therapy. It isn't even so much that we want to do this as much as we need to. I myself feel this way, though I wouldn't say I'm enslaved to my art. If anything, I enjoy this, and I'm glad I don't run out of things to draw. Some artists and illustrators have trouble tapping into this, and so art therapists are needed to help them get started and uncork whatever is keeping them bottled up inside. Using art and illustration as a simple method of release might not sound very glamorous or ambitious, but this is as personal as art can possibly be to the artist. People who don't have this drive may not understand what fuels it, and there are those who say they don't see the point in making art simply for the sake of it. But for those who have the capacity to do this, it is a blessing. Before I use that word, I'm sure you're all just dying to hear me say, let me say this. It is foolish to expect anyone to come up with anything that is completely, 100% purely original. Everything that can be done has already been done to death, 1,000 times over. Everything we do and create is in some way or another influenced by things we have already seen. Everything we are exposed to, everything we encounter, affects what we do from that point on to some small degree, no matter how seemingly insignificant. Whether it is a setting we live in, the atoms that surround us, or even other people's art, even when someone paints a forest or a face, or just makes a random mess of colors, somewhere in that is information derived from something that person's mind has absorbed from the world around them. The idea of creating something completely grand and new that hasn't been seen before is very nice, but it simply isn't possible. All we can really do is make a big swirly melting pot in our minds filled with all the things that we have ever seen throughout our life, pick out a few of these things, and try to rearrange them in new combinations, while adding a piece of what makes us us to make it special somehow. This goes for everything. Books, comic books, cartoons, movies, music. It does not even matter what country any of these things are from. I've seen a lot of illustrations throughout my 2 decades of life, and every time someone blabbers on about how unique and original something is, regardless of style or technique, it really isn't anything I haven't seen somewhere before. No matter what you dream of, no matter what you unleash into the world, someone somewhere at some point before you has already done something like it. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, though. We are individuals and we should try new things, or at least new mixtures of things. My point is, based on what I've encountered throughout my life and how I perceive it, that given all the artists in the world, especially considering how big our population is, that out of all of them, there are going to be a lot that share similar styles and techniques. Even though you can often put 2 pieces next to each other and see that on their own they look nothing alike, they're extremely likely to share a likeness with something somewhere that already exists. I look at a lot of things and realize that they aren't really all that different. But this is not a competition to see who is the most special. There is no need to go to great lengths in your conspicuous efforts to avoid ever allowing your work to resemble someone else's at all costs. There is nothing wrong with being inspired by something that already exists and adding your own personal flair to it. Some do this a little bit, some take it a bit far. Some things are, or at least appear, more original than others, but most of us to some extent do this, even if it's hardly noticeable by itself. If someone honestly tries to come up with their own unique style and it shares a few similarities with other styles, such as eyes that are too big or chins that are too pointy, there's no need to ridicule them if they honestly tried to incorporate whatever's floating around in their mind into what they make, because even if things look similar or the same at a glance, just as there are different artists with different personalities, there are things that make their products different. Little things that you need an eye for detail to notice. Even though there are certain things that a lot of us share, we all have our own little quirks and tics and habits unique to us that we often use regardless of what we're making, without even trying. These can separate what we make from what someone else makes. There are styles with people that are portly. There are styles where people are tall, thin, and lanky, with a little hair at the top of their bodies. There are styles intended to be cute and lacy. There are styles that are dark and gritty. There are styles where people are booming with muscle. There are styles with countless details. There are styles with hardly any detail that can still say a lot with a few lines used. There are styles where everything is meticulously evened out. And there are styles where everyone is quirky looking, with whacked out proportions. There are even styles that try to be realistic and resemble normal people. Yet there are things that snobby art teachers cannot look past, such as big eyes. Not all things drawn in anime style feature this, but a lot of them do, so this is what most people immediately think of when they hear the A word. Many people find it unnatural looking and difficult to relate to. But here's something I've realized. The anime style stereotype, what most people make of it, is a caricature. A caricature is an illustration in which a certain defining trait is defined even more, in this case, big eyes. The most basic anime style is a caricature of goodness. If you want someone to appear kind, caring, pure, sweet, whatever, just give them sofa-looking doe eyes. Similarly, you can make a villain look scary by giving them narrow eyes. But here's the thing. Because of this, despite not all anime things looking exactly the same, anime is pretty predictable. Those how to draw manga books that tell the readers to do things a certain predictable way certainly do not help. The reason Mona Lisa is so intriguing is because her expression is so ambiguous and not easy to read. This makes her appear deep and complex. She is thought-provoking and asks for something on the viewer's part. The stereotypical anime style is the opposite of this. Most things drawn in anime style are meant to vividly express a character's emotion and thoughts in a way that makes those emotions easily recognizable. The people who don't think this has any depth think so because a character's personality should not be so apparent and easy to read, simply based on their outward appearance. That is not art, it's an illustration. Art is malleable and can be reinterpreted in many various ways. An illustration is cleanly defined and makes things clear to the viewer. It actually isn't as simple or black and white as I may unintentionally make it sound, but this is the best way for me to say it. In the case of anime, the styles of the cartoon often miss many details that do not carry over from the manga it was based on. Most manga more vividly reflect their illustrators and what they were thinking and feeling when they drew this, and are simply more distinct and unique than 17 cartoons drawn by the same guy who simply imitates those unique artists but cannot truly capture what was in their mind no matter how pretty this copy is. I hear people say that the anime look easily makes everything it touches look bad because it is bad. But here's what I don't get. Why is it bad? Why is it okay for someone to draw anything else in any other style, using any other techniques, even if they're trying to copy or emulate something that they did not make, but somehow wrong for them to draw something that to some extent resembles anime? Why is this one particular style so bad if nothing else is? I myself am not biased in favor of or against it. Everything I've said so far is simply in a matter-of-factly way. I respect and appreciate all art styles, no matter how fluid or crude, but I just don't understand why some people hate this style so much. I do think art is something that should not be taken lightly, and when I see some snobby kid drawing their favorite Naruto characters or whatever in an attempt to be cool, even though they may have very little talent or flair to devote to anything of their own, I think it's annoying. And there are a lot of people who can't imagine any reason someone would ever succumb to the anime style other than that. And if someone really is just trying to emulate this style because they think it's like so awesome, that really is shallow and petty and lazy. But what if someone just uses this style because they like it? What if it goes well with the pictures in their head and their emotion is more accurately portrayed with this style than if they use something completely different? As hard as it may be for some of you to understand, there are people who just find it enjoyable. Some people say things like, did Leonardo da Vinci draw in that style? Fuck no. The logic behind this being that because guys like that didn't use it, that somehow makes it wrong for anyone else to give into it. As I said earlier, it is unfair to compare anyone to great artists like that because not everyone means to be a great artist. Not everyone wants to be revered or become famous. Not everyone wants to make a career out of it. Not everyone wants to please anyone else. A lot of dumb kids use this style for the sake of fitting in, but there are those that just need to draw for the sake of drawing something, and they're comfortable with this. Some people just like it, and there is nothing wrong with that. Not everyone needs to do things a certain way to accommodate certain people's tastes, because no matter what you do, there are going to be some people who like it and a lot of people who don't. Some argue that anime style is lazy because there aren't enough lines to define all the complex facial features that most people have in real life. This argument is very hollow and pretentious, considering that there are anime that try to look realistic, but there's no reason why they need to. This sounds a lot like realism supposedly being superior to abstract art. There is no need for elaborate lines. Sometimes less is more. Not everybody can do this, but some are able to show vibrant emotion with very few lines placed ever so meticulously. How many lines you use, what style it's in, it doesn't matter. So, is anime style a form of art? Well, like most things these days, no. It's a means of illustration. On its own, anime is not remarkable or special. It's just another style to go along with countless others out there in that big melting pot. Anyone can draw big eyes and a heart-shaped head with spiky hair. However, even though anime style by itself is illustration, which doesn't even somehow make it a bad thing, it does have the capacity to be art. It simply depends on the artist and what was within them that other people don't have. I've seen countless pieces of generic cookie-cutter faces made by kids who were trying to draw things a certain way that they thought was cool, and that is not creative, regardless of what style you're using. Only doing things a certain way and denying all others is just as bad as someone telling you can't do things a certain way because they personally find it hard to look at. Nothing you draw in anime style can be creative if you're trying to make it look like anime style. Nothing can be creative if you're blatantly trying to copy something else. But I have seen a lot of artists who manage to break out of the confines of what this style is perceived to be by all the unappreciative twats out there, and pour so much of themselves into it that it ended up looking different. I have seen artists who share a few of the same tropes, but use what is in their mind to override this style, and create something that feels different. I have seen astonishingly beautiful pieces with these traits that still go beyond what most would expect and make the viewers feel things that were unpredicted. Not everyone who uses this style is creative enough to rearrange things like this, but some are. Not everything is entirely different, but not everything is entirely 100% the same. Bottom line, anime style is not the best style in the world, but it is not the worst. There is nothing wrong with it. There is no need to feel threatened by this, as if it's somehow going to be the downfall of the art world because a few kids too many like it. It's just another style, period. It is mainly illustration, but it can possibly be art. On its own, anime is not naturally art, but it isn't impossible for anime to be art. It's not even that this somehow makes illustrations inferior to art, it's just more straightforward if anything. It depends on you. Not everyone is gonna like it just because you do, and you shouldn't expect them to. That is just as bad as someone expecting everyone else to hate something just because they can't stand it. Regardless of style, technique, colors, lines, anything, in the end, all we're really doing is taking what we know and adding ourselves to it. And if we add enough of ourselves to something, it can become something interesting. I respect those artists who have gone beyond the crude stereotype of anime style and made something of their own. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Toodles. Need to catch my breath.